don't talk about the what-ifs. You prepare for every eventuality, and then you make sure you deal with the events as they happen, so that we can be prepared, which is why it's important. We have acted from the beginning on the advice of the Chief Medical Officer and Public Health England, and it is important that we keep working in that methodical way, day after day, which is what we have been doing, to make sure that we look after everyone safely. And where we can see that people are best cared for, because in many, many cases, this will not be a critical illness for individuals. So looking after themselves, keeping their fluids up, taking things like paracetamols, keeping themselves isolated, so again, you don't spread it amongst your family, will really help us keep on top of this.
Okay.
And that is what we have been preparing ourselves for in a methodical way, and making sure the NHS are involved from the start.
Okay, you mentioned there you're preparing day by day, so why is there a COBRA meeting only taking place on Monday?
The Prime Minister and the Health Secretary are meeting today. We have daily call-ins if we're not in London, and we have daily meetings in London, and this has been happening from the beginning. We talk to each other throughout the day and throughout the week, and that is as you would expect, because there are, as you've so well articulated, other things going on in the health piece all the time.
Joe Churchill, thank you very much indeed for taking the time to speak to us. We're just going to take you to the World Health Organization now, update on COVID-19.
There are now 4,351 cases in 49 countries and 67 deaths. Since yesterday, Denmark, Estonia, Lithuania, Netherlands, and Nigeria have all reported their first cases. All these cases have links to Italy. 24 cases have been exported from Italy to 14 countries, and 97 cases have been exported from Iran to 11 countries. The continued increase in the number of cases and the number of affected countries over the last few days are clearly of concern. Our epidemiologists have been monitoring these developments continuously, and we have now increased our assessment of the risk of spread and the risk of impact of COVID-19 to very high at global level. What we see at the moment are linked epidemics of COVID-19 in several countries, but most cases can still be traced to known contacts or clusters of cases. We do not see evidence as yet that the virus is spreading freely in communities. As long as that's the case, we still have a chance of containing this virus if robust action is taken to detect cases early, isolate and care for patients, and trace contacts. As I said yesterday, there are different scenarios in different countries and different scenarios within the same country. The key to containing this virus is to break the chain of transmission. Yesterday, I spoke about the things countries must do to prepare for cases and prevent onward transmission. The report of the WHO-China Joint Mission has now published its report, which is available in English on the WHO website and will also be posted in Chinese on the National Health Commission website. The report includes a wealth of information and 22 recommendations for China, for affected and unaffected countries, for the international community and the general public. It calls for all countries to educate their populations, to expand surveillance, to find, isolate and care for every case, to trace every contact, and to take an all-of-government and all-of-society approach. This is not a job for the health ministry alone. At the same time, work is also progressing on vaccines and therapeutics. More than 20 vaccines are in development globally, and several therapeutics are in clinical trials. We expect the first results in a few weeks.
Hi, thank you for calling Blank Fitness in West Chase. We're using drone for as low as $1 today. My name is Charlie. How can I help you?
Hi, yes, I was calling. I was just trying to see if I don't know if you were looking on the news, but they had like a little water release or whatever,
Yeah.
but I didn't know if it affected the showers at you guys' gym.
No, we're good. The showers are up and running.
Perfect, perfect, perfect. Okay, okay. I was just checking to check on that.
Yeah, no problem.
Thank you, thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Bye.
Bye.
Japan after being on board the Diamond Princess cruise ship. The Foreign Office have said we're supporting the family of a British man who's died in Japan, are in contact with the local authorities. Our sympathies and thoughts are with his family at this difficult time. A short statement there from the Foreign Office. Let's speak to Professor Martin Marshall, Chair of the Royal College of GPs. Mr. Marshall, thank you for taking the time to speak to us and thank you for waiting. I suppose I would like to ask you your reaction from a UK perspective, what you heard from Joe Churchill, one of the ministers for health in the UK, with regards her assurance that the NHS is prepared for whatever is coming its way with this.
Well, the Minister's right that enormous amount of preparation has gone into dealing with COVID-19, both within the NHS and across government. Of course, the NHS is under enormous pressure and has been for some time. At the moment, it's dealing with the problem perfectly well. If it takes off as it looks like it's going to over the next few weeks, then I guess it's likely that some of the routine work the NHS done is going to have to be cancelled in order to create space to deal with the implications of the virus. At the moment, we're not at that place. At the moment, the NHS has contained the disease and kept it remarkably contained. We don't know what's going to happen over the next few weeks.
Yeah, I mean, just your own opinion and how concerned you are about what might happen in the next few weeks. How are you feeling about it?
Well, I think we have to be concerned. We've tried to put the problem into perspective over the last few weeks. We do have a very small number of cases. That's a consequence of the NHS being very good at dealing with problems like this. We do expect it to increase, and of course that will have implications for the NHS. It'll have implications for the staff who work in the NHS, and of course for patients and communities. I think the NHS is reasonably well prepared for that, and I think we know what to do. The advice for patients remains the same as it always has done. Good hygiene, as the Director General of the WHO said, good hand hygiene, making sure that we use tissues once and then dispose of them, making sure that proper isolation mechanisms are followed. We know what we need to do in order to try to keep it at bay as much as possible.
Just wondering about the sort of local angle on this as the chair of the Royal College of GPs. We heard in the last hour with Mark Austin presenting a special programme for us that some people have been getting in touch saying that they'd been advised by GPs to go into A&E to then, I suppose, be tested for COVID-19. And obviously that is the wrong advice, people being told to walk into accident and emergency. Is the chain of communication working here?
That advice isn't correct, and if it has been given, then it's extremely rare for it to be given, because the vast majority of general practice know exactly what to do, and we're very clear with the messages that we're giving out to our patients and our communities, that if you think you might have the problem, i.e. you've got a cough and temperature and breathlessness, and have been in contact with somebody who has been to one of the high-risk countries, or you've been to one of the high-risk countries yourself, you shouldn't go to your general practice, you shouldn't go to the casualty department, you should call NHS 111 in order for them to decide whether you need to be tested, and you should isolate yourself until you know the result of the test.
Okay, on a national scale, something the Minister, I think it's fair to say, didn't quite answer for me was what the specific plans might be if it does get worse, when you bear in mind the fact that several NHS trusts are already operating at capacity for their critical care bed space. In your opinion, is it part, potentially, of the government's plans to move people around the country where the space might be to care for them?
I don't know the answer to that question. I work in general practice, I work in primary care, where I'm confident that general practice know what they need to do. As the Minister, and indeed as the Director General of the WHO said, for the vast majority of people that we see, it's unlikely to be a serious condition. It's really only a serious condition for older people. I don't know exactly what the arrangements would be in hospital. What I do know is an awful lot of planning is going on, and I'm confident that they will find the right systems in order to be able to manage very sick patients if that were to happen.
And what would you say then if it was someone watching today who's maybe over the age of 50, which according to the current death rates, that sort of doubles when you hit 50, and we're still only talking, around 1% when we say that, it's important to point out. But someone watching older than that age perhaps, what would your advice be if they're a bit concerned?
Well, if they're a bit concerned, it's most likely that they've got a cold or a flu. It isn't at all likely that they've got coronavirus. We need to keep that in perspective. If they think they might have coronavirus, then they should call 111. They shouldn't visit their general practice. They shouldn't go to A&E. And 111 will help them to manage the process appropriately. If they are elderly, or if they do have other medical conditions, then clearly that's more serious, and 111 will deal with it appropriately.
Martin Marshall, Chair of the Royal College of GPs, thank you for taking the time to speak to us today. Now, in China, the government insists it is winning the battle against COVID-19 as the number of new cases appears to be slowing down. Indeed, we just heard from the World Health Organization that continues to be the case. But inside Wuhan, the quarantine city where the outbreak started, families affected by the virus have told Sky News that they've been abandoned to fight the disease on their own. Our correspondent in Beijing, Tom Cheshire, reports.
On Chinese state media, it's going well. Coronavirus conquered by medical care and fist bumps. For others inside Wuhan, the experience is very different. Mr. Peng's father fell ill at the end of January. His family begged the Wuhan authorities for help. Into a coma, unattended for 3 days, his father died, pictured here with his son. Mr. Peng doesn't know what happened to his body. The lockdown in Wuhan is still in place. Residents confined to their flats with guards at the compound. Maya is inside with her mother and a young daughter. Her child has not left their flat for more than 5 weeks now. She doesn't resent the lockdown just how long it took for authorities to put it in place.
By the end of December or the beginning of January, I studied nurse for my major, so I have some friends there working in a hospital. So they were telling me, I asked them, they were telling me that this is not good, but they didn't want to tell me more about it. So I'm thinking, well, this is definitely something serious.
Well, why didn't they want to tell you more about it?
I assume, I could only guess, was because maybe because they cannot say anything about it. In China, that sometimes it's very hard to talk about this kind of crisis.
And some people have been completely trapped by the lockdown. Mr. Li drove 1,000 kilometers to visit his grandmother for Lunar New Year, and then the ban was put in place. His street has been physically barricaded.
所以说，我们现在7个人就挤在2间房子里。说2间房子，其实就是1间房子，中间有一个隔断而已。一个单人床上住2个人，这是居住方面很不方便。
His family are not taking baths for fear of catching a cold and being sent to a quarantine center.
现在真的是处于两难的境地，口北不放，目的地不接收。我感觉心理上就觉得我们现在彻底成孤儿了。
On state, the scale of the struggle against coronavirus is clear. It is the small, difficult details, the details that constitute people's lives, that are missing. Tom Cheshire, Sky News, Beijing.
Well, Tom's report there, of course, from where the COVID-19 started, specifically in Wuhan. It's had a huge ripple effect across the world, and now global markets are facing their worst week since 2008 as a result of the outbreak. So how's Britain going to fare financially? Joining me now is economist Linda Hui. Linda, thank you for taking the time to speak to us. So let's start with the UK specifically. What has the effect been, and what might it be in the coming days?
Well, I think the British businesses in China are already reporting disruptions to their business. I think a recent survey found that half the businesses expect to do 10% less sales, a quarter expect a worse impact than that. So I think what you're going to find is a squeeze in terms of supplies potentially, because so much of our consumer electronics are produced in China, but oftentimes firms have inventory they can draw on, so we wouldn't necessarily expect an increase in prices straight away. Normally, there's always some leeway. So a lot will depend on how long this virus continues to disrupt, and that's just impossible to say at the moment.
Yeah, I mean, on that point, will business leaders and people on the floors of stock exchanges be listening to people in America and indeed the World Health Organization saying that we're in for a long haul? Is not suddenly going to go away in a month or two. This will be next year even. And how will those people on the stock floor be reacting?
I think there's a general sense that stock markets have risen a lot over the last couple of years. So in this part of the business cycle, Britain has had a stagnant quarter, a negative quarter in terms of GDP growth. It's not unusual for markets to come down a bit, but this virus is putting a downside risk. And that's why you're beginning to see declines in terms of investors, not just in the UK, but elsewhere, pulling their money out of stock markets, taking a little profit is, I think, how it's described, and moving it into, say, government bonds. So I think in that sense, it's just accelerating, or perhaps it's a trigger for something that might have already come along. But another part of the reaction, which is important to note, is that we've never had a global pandemic like this, or really not for a very long time. And some of the more worrying estimates are that it could trigger the world into a recession. It's very unlikely, because with all the uncertainty. But if that's the case, then I would also expect why markets are nervous, because obviously a recession now would be extremely challenging, because central banks and governments are indebted. Central banks have already cut interest rates to nearly zero, as we have in the UK. So I think it's that also sense of worry that might be permeating through as the IMF and others give growth estimates that are
almost every month being downgraded in terms of what could happen in terms of the world economy dipping into that worrying negative territory.
And therefore, how crucial is what the United States and China do in terms of trying to collaborate and find a way through this? You know, we talk about 2008 as a marker for the last big crash in my introduction there. 2008 was also a marker where they managed to work together, the US and China, somewhat. Things are a bit different now, but how important is that relationship if things just do continue to get a bit worse?
It's very important. Financial stability would be the thing that we should watch out for the most. I think the United States still remains the financial center. So long as we have a good relationship with the US, the Fed, I'm sure, would be providing liquidity. So in other words, if there's cash that's needed for British businesses, I think all of that is something that policymakers are well aware of. I think what we don't want is the phase one truce between US and China in terms of their trade war unraveling. And with this virus, it's in the interest of both the US and China to make sure that their phase one trade deal is implemented well through the coming months because of the downside risk of the coronavirus for China and for the US. Of course, there's an election coming up for the presidency. So there's a lot of reasons this year I think those two countries should be more cooperative. But for our financial stability, a lot will depend on the relationship with the US Fed and then, of course, also with the European Central Bank. And I think those relationships are good.
Economist Linda Hui, thank you for taking the time to speak to us.
Thank you.
Now we're going to take a change, look at the weather. Parts of Wales and northern England are bracing for more bad weather as Storm Jorge is expected to bring strong winds of up to 70 miles per hour. A severe danger to life flood warning is covering flooded regions already as residents prepare for the situation to get. Our correspondent Sally Lockwood has the latest from Ironbridge in Shropshire. That's one of the areas hit hardest by the floods recently, and the threat of the River Severn's defences could be breached.
The levels of the River Severn behind me are extremely high, almost at its highest level ever. There's also temporary flood defences along the edge of the River Severn there, which are being shored up at the moment. They were compromised this week, and residents had some of their homes flooded on Monday. It's been a really tough week for people here, so to know that yet another storm is about to hit this weekend, not just severe rain but also heavy winds, really does fill them with dread. Let me just...
Levels rise in response to this rainfall that's coming in on Sunday or Monday.
And of course we've seen the second wettest February on record. River levels are already extremely high, ground is saturated. How much worse could things get with this heavy rain this weekend?
Well, the forecast at the moment, certainly for the River Severn, is that whilst river levels will come up again, and we will see a continuation and extension of the miserable flooding that many communities down here have suffered. We're not expecting river levels to reach the really, really high and dangerous levels that we've seen in the past few days. So not as bad in terms of the risk and the hazard, but a continuation of the ongoing flood misery for many.
Now there's some fairly angry residents here who have obviously experienced flooding already. Pretty unhappy with the level of flood defences that are in place. Of course, there's temporary flood defences at the moment. What would you say to them?
Well, we understand that flooding is a really horrible thing to happen to people, and we have been working with them through this to support them, to protect them as much as we can. And in fact, the Environment Agency's actions this week have protected 34,000 properties from flooding, and through the winter it's 127,000. So although some people have flooded, and that is a tragedy for them, and our thoughts are with them, and we will work with them, actually we've done a lot to protect many, many other people as well.
And just briefly, we're seeing a lot more of these extreme weather events. How much tougher is your job getting?
It is. This weather, this climate change is asking us some really tough questions. There isn't a single solution. We're looking at the moment, how can we get through this week? What can we do in the immediate? But we're also asking the longer term questions about how can we as a country be better prepared, be more resilient, what should we be doing, and we're looking into that and taking a strategic view on that for the future.
Okay, Tim Norton, thank you very much indeed for joining us. So another tough weekend ahead for many parts of the country. 70 flood warnings currently in place, that yellow weather warning kicking in tomorrow as Storm Jorge is forecast to hit many parts of the UK, the third named storm this month, and a very difficult weekend yet again for many residents around the country.
Well, Sally's guests there talking about how they're preparing the emergency services for climate change. Stay with us here on Sky News, because coming up next, the Power Review. Climate campaigner Greta Thunberg tells student activists in Bristol they will not be silenced.
Hi, I'm Hannah Stott with the latest showbiz news. A warning, some flash photography is coming up. Actress Kate Blanchett has said that Harvey Weinstein's conviction for sexual assault and rape was a profound relief that honoured and respected the women that had come forward. She spoke at the Berlin Film Festival shortly before the launch of her new drama series, Stateless.
I'm very interested, I think, like the majority of human beings, for justice and change. And that's an act that's hopefully going to keep the ball rolling to justice and change. No one's interested in revenge. In order for a democracy to function properly, you need a free and independent press, and you need a functioning judicial system.
The accused, Tom Robinson, sat right there. He was brought into the courtroom through a side door wearing handcuffs and escorted by the bailiff, who unlocked and removed the handcuffs for full motion and for Tom to sit.
The Broadway cast of To Kill a Mockingbird has performed at Madison Square Garden in front of 18,000 schoolchildren in a one-time only performance. It marks the first time a Broadway play has been performed at the venue nicknamed the world's most famous arena, which is home to the New York Knicks and Rangers.
I loved the book in middle school when I read it, and seeing it live and seeing the characters come to life, it's so much more real, and it makes you feel so much more.
But getting to do it for 18,000 middle and high school students who were also very much engaged in the play, but then also felt freedom to respond and cheer and scream and gasp. It was magical. It felt like what theater used to be thousands of years ago.
Honestly, I think, again, just the gravity of the topic that they were acting out, you had no choice but to just be quiet and watch as, they acted out an injustice, a very harsh injustice, not just to one man, but an entire race.
Welcome back. The climate campaigner Greta Thunberg says she will not be silenced as she addressed young activists at a climate rally in Bristol earlier. The teenage environmentalist joined hundreds of protesters who marched through the city as part of a so-called school strike.
There will be a time when we will look back and ask ourselves what we did right now. How do we want to be remembered? This is an emergency. People are already suffering and dying from the consequences of the climate and environmental emergency. But it will get worse. And still, this emergency is being completely ignored by the politicians, the media, and those in power. Basically, nothing is being done to halt this crisis, despite all the beautiful words and promises from our elected officials. So what did we do during this crucial time? What we will do right now? Well, I will not stand aside and watch. I will not be silent while the world is on fire. World leaders adults in the room. It should not be this way. We should not be the ones who will have to lead on this and tell the uncomfortable truth. Once again, they sweep their mess under the rug for us young people, for their children to clean up for them.
Greta Thunberg speaking in Bristol earlier today. Meanwhile, the Duke of Sussex has met John Bon Jovi at the famous Abbey Road studios today to learn about a charity single that the 80s rocker is recording for Harry's Invictus Games Foundation. The rock star single called Unbroken shines a spotlight on veterans living with post-traumatic stress disorder, and it will feature the Invictus Games choir. Sky's world correspondent Rhiannon Mills brought us the latest from Abbey Road Studios.
Well, we are in a very recognisable place, especially if you are a fan of the Beatles. We are in Studio 2, which is where the Beatles recorded 11 of their 13 albums. That, for example, is Paul McCartney's piano, so that gives you an idea of just how special this place is. But the reason we're here is because Prince Harry has been joining John Bon Jovi and the Invictus Choir for a very special recording of a new single that's going to be released to try and raise funds for the Invictus Games Foundation. And joining me are a couple of members of the choir, Sue and Andy. Got your names right? That's good. So how did it feel to be here today with Prince Harry, John Bon Jovi, part of what is an amazing new single that you recorded?
No words can actually explain just what it means to us. From our hearts, it's just wonderful, awesome, very, very special.
Yeah, it's thrilling. Thrilling to be looking at the situation and seeing what depth we've got to go to. This is fundraising. It's fundraising for a good cause, and to be involved as a small choir, we're amateur, but we can produce such a good sound. So yesterday, with John Bon Jovi himself, it was just a wonder to be able to sing these words.
Prince Harry's obviously got a lot going on behind the scenes at the moment. How does he seem to all of you today?
Oh, Prince Harry is as wonderful as ever, and it's just such an honour and a privilege to share this time with him and with all the choir too. And again, it's about reaching out to others, to encourage others. Don't give up. Who knows, it could be the beginning of singing, joining a choir.
Yeah, I've met him a few times. We need more of him, really, to be involved in the choir. We've asked him to sing, and he jokingly says, no, I'm not going to, but we need something to look forward to. We need the next performance and the next performance, so hopefully we'll be selected to go to the Invictus Games for singing in the stadium. So the choir is going from strength to strength. We're a good bunch of people, and we've learned to live with each other and our problems.
And you all braved the rain to get on that zebra crossing as well. Quite a moment.
Zebra crossing.
Yeah. I mean, history. I mean, what an honour and a privilege just to share that moment. It was just awesome.
Yeah. And, and me in a wheelchair, I sometimes forget where I am, in a wheelchair, no legs, and I'm there posing, and I'm thinking, I saw that album 40 years ago.
Yes.
And there I am there with those gentlemen and Sue. It was lovely to be with you.
It was lovely, and to you too. Yes.
An amazing day. I think you've got to get on with filming the rest of the music video, so I better leave you to it. Of course, Prince Harry has got an awful lot that is going on behind the scenes, but today, once again, you could see that he was thrilled to be back here with his Forces family and trying to get on with promoting the importance of the Invictus Games.
Rhiannon Mills there. Let's quickly have a look at the weather.
The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
Storm Jorge will bring heavy rain and gales tomorrow. 60-mile-an-hour gusts are possible almost everywhere. Before that, though, many places ending this afternoon dry. There'll be rain from Wales across to East Anglia and a few patchy outbreaks elsewhere. Most parts seeing further heavy rain spreading from the south west tonight. adding to the flood risk, but Ireland, Northern Ireland, Wales and the southwest will see more scattered showers moving in later. Northern and western parts will turn chilly with a risk of ice, but a stiff wind over England and Wales will keep it milder there.
The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
Do stay with us here on Sky News. In the next hour, more on the breaking news this afternoon that a British passenger on the Diamond Princess cruise ship in Japan has now died after contracting the coronavirus. This is Sky News. Coming up on the programme today. A British man has died from coronavirus in Japan. He'd been a passenger on the Diamond Princess cruise ship. Here in the UK, the number of confirmed cases rises to 19, with 2 more in England and 1 in Wales. The global markets slide on coronavirus fears as the Bank of England warns of a UK economic downgrade. Also ahead, flood-hit communities brace once again as Storm Jorge breaks down. And climate activist Greta Thunberg tells a rally in Bristol that children will not be silenced. Good afternoon. We start with breaking news that a British man who was a passenger on board the stricken cruise ship, the Diamond Princess, has died from coronavirus in Japan. He's the first British person to lose their life due to the COVID-19 outbreak, and our correspondent Katie Spencer is here. Tell us what we know about this.
Yeah, I think sadly there had been some concern that it might only be a matter of time before we see the first case of a British national to die as a result of COVID-19. We've had confirmation of this afternoon. The Foreign Office have said they are supporting the family of a British man who's died in Japan, and they're in contact with local authorities out there. We know from the local authorities out there, the Japanese Ministry of Health, that this man was on board the Diamond Princess cruise ship. Now we know that the number of people that have died on
board that cruise ship has now reached 6 in total. At least 4 UK nationals who were on board the Diamond Princess contracted the virus. Was one of those 4.